Imagine a cruel desert where hope is a mirage and life hangs by a thread. In the heart of this vastness, a family on the brink of destitution performs an act of kindness that defies destiny. What happens when a widow and her children rescue a dying stranger, unaware that he holds the secret to a transformed life? Prepare for a story of faith, courage, and the immeasurable power of a single gesture. The desert dust was the only constant companion of Maria, a woman of grit with eyes marked by pain, yet an unbreakable soul. A widow for 2 years, ever since an unrelenting fever took her husband, she found herself alone in a small, isolated cabin in the heart of the Wild West, place where law was enforced by the scorching sun and survival was a daily battle. Her 2 children, Aina, 10 years old, with her insatiable curiosity and precocious intelligence, and little Joho, 7, with his inexhaustible energy and contagious smile, were her reason for being, the flame that kept hope alight in her chest. Life was an arduous struggle. Harvests were scarce, water a precious resource, and with each dawn, hunger lurked at the door. But a strange premonition hung in the air, a whisper of destiny that Maria couldn't ignore. The cracked wooden walls, the roof that occasionally let in fine desert sand, and a few worn pieces of furniture were silent witnesses to a life of privation. Maria strove to keep everything organized and clean, a way to resist the chaos that threatened their existence. She spent mornings in the small patch of land behind the house, trying to coax something from the arid soil, and afternoons sewing to sell old rags in the nearest village, a 2-day horse journey she rarely could afford to make. Something was about to happen, something that would turn their lives upside down, for better or worse. The small farm that had once been her husband's dream now seemed a burden too heavy for her shoulders. The absence of her husband, a strong and gentle man who had dreamed of building an empire in the desert, was felt in every corner of the cabin, a feeling that something was about to change, for better or worse. The sun beat down on the land as usual, and the dry air drifted into the cabin. She felt a chill down her spine, a shiver that had nothing to do with the weather. As she tidied the few belongings, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if expecting something she couldn't yet see. Destiny, silently, was about to cross her path with that of a stranger, and life in the desert was about to reveal one of its greatest secrets. With each memory, a pang of pain in Maria's heart. She wondered if he somehow was watching over them, if he would approve of her choices, if he would be proud of her strength. But the answers were only the echo of the wind in the desert, and Maria had to find her own strength to move forward. The nearest neighbors were days away by horse, and the closest town was a distant dot on the horizon, an unattainable place for someone who barely had enough to eat. The hungry eyes of Aina and Jos were a torment for their mother, who often went to bed with an empty stomach to ensure her children had the bare minimum. Hope was a flickering flame, almost extinguished with every strong gust of adversity. Maria felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, the responsibility of being the sole pillar of her small family. The local sheriff, a man of few words and tired eyes, showed veiled sympathy, but his hands were tied by bank laws. He had warned Maria that the deadline for debt payment was running out, and if she couldn't come up with the money, the cabin would be auctioned off in less than a month. Debts accumulated. The bank threatened to repossess the property, and the prospect of losing the only home they knew haunted Maria's thoughts. Sleepless nights were filled with silent tears as she tried to devise a plan, a way out, anything that could ward off the nightmare of dispossession. The scenery was desolate, parched fields, wind howling through the cracks in the wooden cabin, and a constant feeling of isolation. Aina and Joan, despite their tender age, felt the tension in the air. They tried to help in any way they could, Aina tending the small garden and Jo gathering firewood, but the innocence of their smiles couldn't hide the worry Maria saw in their eyes. With each passing day, the shadow of misfortune drew closer, and Maria felt despair tighten its grip on her heart. She prayed for a miracle, a divine intervention that could save them from the abyss. Little did she know that this miracle would come in an unusual form, and that the vastness of the desert was about to reveal a secret that would change their lives forever. That day began like so many others, with the sun rising like a fireball on the horizon, promising another day of suffocating heat and arduous labor. The cabin, though small and ill-maintained, was Maria's and her children's only refuge. Food was a constant worry. The family's diet consisted of dry bread, some wilted vegetables, and, rarely, some game meat that Maria managed to hunt. Loneliness was another silent enemy. On that fateful day, Maria felt a strange premonition. Maria's routine was exhausting, an endless cycle of work and worry. That day, the search for water became even more pressing. The cabin's well was almost dry, and the only alternative was a creek several miles away, a dangerous but necessary location. With Aina and Joe in tow, each carrying empty buckets that seemed too heavy for their small arms, they ventured through the arid landscape under the merciless sun that scorched the cracked earth. As they drew closer, the outline became clearer. A fallen man, his horse, an equally exhausted creature, tied to a nearby cactus. Maria's heart skipped a beat. It was a cowboy, his clothes dusty and torn, his hat tossed aside, revealing a pale, sweaty face. "No, my son, we're going to help him." She knelt beside the man, assessing the situation. The wound seemed deep, and the fever was high. Joe, despite his fatigue, tried to keep their spirits up, telling little stories, while Aina, quieter, watched her mother's determination with admiration. They arrived at the cabin late in the afternoon, exhausted, but with a strange sense of victory. The debt that suffocated her seemed insignificant in the face of the life that was in her hands. She was exhausted, but there was a satisfaction in her heart for having acted with compassion. Every meter traveled under the scorching sun with the man's weight was agony. She laid him on the only bed she had, covered with the few clean sheets she kept. The leg wound was nasty, a deep cut that required more than her rudimentary first aid knowledge. She rushed to find the herbs her mother had taught her to use for infections, grinding them with a stone and applying them to the wound, covering it with a clean piece of cloth. She also made a strong herbal tea for the fever, hoping the liquid forced to his lips could make a difference. The water buckets, which had once seemed heavy, were now light compared to the burden they carried. The children, tired from the adventure, soon fell asleep in a corner of the cabin, wrapped in blankets. But Maria couldn't sleep. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and worries. Who was this man? Could he be dangerous? Could he bring trouble to her family? But above all, there was a glimmer of hope. A strange feeling that this unexpected encounter was not just a burden, but a sign, an omen of something greater to come. The desert, with its vastness and mysteries, had delivered them an enigma, and Maria felt that the answer to this enigma was about to change the course of their lives. The children, even exhausted, showed surprising resilience, driven by their mother's example. Joe, in his moments of fatigue, complained softly, but Aina, with her silent determination, was an invaluable support. She always saw the goodness in Maria, and this act of rescue only reinforced her admiration. Little did she know that this act of kindness, born of the purest generosity, was the first step on a journey that would completely change the destiny of her family. The stranger, though still unconscious, had already begun to weave the threads of a new and unexpected story. He needed water and urgent care. She used medicinal herbs her mother had taught her to collect and prepared an infusion to bring down the fever. The children watched with curiosity and a little apprehension. Who was this man? Where did he come from? And most importantly, what would he do when he woke up? He was unconscious, a wound on his leg bleeding freely, his skin feverish, and his lips parched from dehydration. The path was long and silent, interrupted only by the crunch of shoes on the sand and the buzzing of insects. She knew the dangers the desert held, the stories of bandits and outlaws that haunted the trails. But there was something in the man's gaze, even unconscious, that made her feel a pang of compassion. Her children, with their innocent questions and curious looks, expected action. Leaving a human being to die in those conditions would be something that would haunt her forever. The act of kindness, for Maria, was a reflection of her own humanity, a virtue she refused to lose, even amidst her own misfortune. Maria felt exhaustion in every muscle, but necessity propelled her forward. Suddenly, Anna, with her curious eyes always attentive to her surroundings, pointed to a dark, inert shape in the distance. But seeing the man's vulnerability, concern overcame fear. Her children looked at her with wide eyes, awaiting her decision. Joe, with his childlike innocence, asked, "Is he dying, Mommy?" "Mommy, what's that?" Her voice, a mixture of fear and fascination, broke the heavy silence. Maria squinted, trying to discern the shape in the heat haze. A wave of fear swept over Maria. The desert was merciless to the weak, and many strangers were bandits or unscrupulous men. Maria knew she couldn't leave him there to die. Despite her own destitution, the human instinct to help was stronger. With a concerted effort, Maria and the children managed to drag the man, who was surprisingly heavy, to the shade of a bush. Anna ran to fill a handkerchief with the little water they had, and Maria gently wiped the cowboy's face and lips. He groaned, a faint sound, but one that indicated he was still alive. Carrying the man back to the cabin would be a monumental challenge, but Maria didn't hesitate. She tied the cowboy's horse to hers, and with the children's help, pushing and pulling, they began the arduous journey back home. With each step, the sun beat down and exhaustion increased. The man's weight seemed to crush them. Maria laid the cowboy on her own bed and, with the few resources she possessed, cleaned and bandaged the wound as best she could. As the cowboy rested in her bed, Maria felt a whirlwind of emotions. Maria's decision to help the cowboy was not easy. The cowboy's rescue was a test of her physical and mental strength. Upon arriving at the cabin, exhaustion was absolute. Maria could barely stand. But the priority was the wounded man. The hours dragged on, and Maria remained by the man's side, monitoring his breathing, the temperature of his forehead, every sigh. The following days were a blur of care. Maria tirelessly devoted herself to the stranger, changing compresses, administering the little food they had, and monitoring his breathing. They were blue eyes, intense, but still veiled by weakness. He blinked a few times, confused, trying to focus on his surroundings. "I'm Maria. These are my children, Anna and Joe." Maria was by his side, a damp cloth in her hands. Seeing her, a glimpse of surprise and gratitude crossed his face. Maria and the children continued to care for him with devotion. During their conversations, John revealed little about his past, maintaining an aura of mystery. He mentioned having come from far away, that he was on a long journey, and that the leg injury was caused by an unexpected fall from his horse. "Many would have left me behind. I've seen the condition of your farm. It's difficult for you and your children, isn't it?" "I won't allow that," he said, and the conviction in his voice surprised Maria. "I can help. Not now, but as soon as I'm strong enough to travel. I have resources, many resources." He was a reserved man, but he observed everything carefully, especially the way Maria struggled to support her family. "The harvests don't come. The well is almost dry, and the bank. The bank will take our land in less than a month if I do and pay the debts." It seemed too good to be true, an illusion born of desperation. Their first conversation was cautious, filled with curiosity and gratitude. John, though weak, had a strong presence, an aura of mystery that Maria couldn't decipher. He was a man of few words, but his blue eyes were expressive, revealing a sharp mind and a complex history. She had seen too many empty promises in the desert. He spoke of business, of travels, but avoided giving details about his family or his past. Maria noticed an old scar on his arm, a sign of a life lived under the sun and, perhaps, under danger. She initially thought it was the delirium of fever, a fantasy born of the desert's lack of air. If what John said was true, it would be a miracle, the answer to her most desperate prayers. The idea that her luck could change, that her children could have a future, was almost unbearable in its magnitude. But distrust, a constant companion in her life of privation, kept her from fully embracing hope. John Thornton, the mysterious cowboy, had brought not only a promise, but also a twist that shook the foundations of her reality, and the future of that cabin in the desert was about to be rewritten. But the seriousness in his eyes, the firmness in his voice, made her doubt. How could a man with such resources be wandering the desert, injured and penniless? The story of the men who attacked and robbed him was plausible, but it still sounded like a script from an adventure book, not the reality of her arid life. She respected his silence, for she felt there was something deeper behind his reserve. The desert, after all, was a place where many sought refuge or oblivion. Her voice faltered on the last sentence, the pain evident in her eyes. John, even injured, perceived her difficulty. He noticed Maria's worried glances, the fatigue in her eyes, the way she shared every piece of bread with her children. He saw the dignity in her poverty, the strength in her vulnerability. And it was this observation that led him to make his revelation. The children helped as best they could, Aina reading to the man, even though he was unconscious, and Joe bringing water and firewood. You may not believe me now, Maria, but I am a man of my word. He had nothing with him but a few coins and warm clothes. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The fever haunted him for days, and Maria never left his side, applying cold compresses and monitoring his condition. The children, with their innocence, turned the routine of care into a kind of game. Aina read adventure stories to John, even when he was unconscious, and Johan brought wildflowers he found in the desert, placing them beside the bed. These small gestures of affection were a balm for Maria, who saw in her children the purity that the world outside seemed to have lost. The idea that this man, rescued from the brink of death, could be the answer to her prayers seemed like a fantasy. However, there was something in his gaze, a seriousness that made her hesitate to dismiss his words completely, an unexpected twist. And I owe you my life. I am a rich man, Maria, very rich. The fever came and went in waves, and for several nights, Maria feared he wouldn't survive. Maria, he began, his voice stronger now. You've been incredibly kind. I'm indebted to you. Until, one sunny morning, a miracle happened. The cowboy opened his eyes. I did what anyone would do. You were in need of help. Don't strain yourself, Maria advised him. You're very weak. You need to rest. Where am I? His voice was hoarse, a barely audible whisper. In my house. You were injured and unconscious in the desert, Maria replied, her voice soft but firm. The cowboy tried to sit up, but the pain in his leg made him recoil. He lay back down, and his eyes swept over the small cabin, taking in the humility of the place. I'm John Thornton. His voice still weak, but with a tone of authority that Maria hadn't expected. In the following days, John slowly began to recover. One afternoon, as Maria mended some old clothes, John watched her with a thoughtful gaze. Maria shrugged. Not everyone, he corrected. Maria sighed. There was no point in hiding the truth. It's very difficult, John. John looked at her for a long moment, a spark of determination in his eyes. Maria looked at him with suspicion. An injured, penniless cowboy who appeared out of nowhere, claiming to have many resources? I appreciate your kindness, John, but I don't want you to worry about us. You need to recover. John smiled, a discreet smile that didn't reach his eyes. Maria's eyes widened. A rich cowboy? The idea was absurd. John's recovery was a slow and painful process. When John finally opened his eyes, a sigh of relief escaped Maria's lips. In the following days, as John regained his strength, Maria tried to understand who he was. Despite John's presence, the shadow of debt continued to hang over Maria. Harvests remained scarce, and bread was a luxury. John's statement that he was a rich man took Maria by surprise. Maria's mind reeled. John's revelation, though seemingly unbelievable, planted a seed of hope in Maria's heart. On one hand, the idea that the mysterious cowboy was, in fact, a rich man was a breath of fresh air amidst the suffocation of destitution. On the other hand, skepticism persisted. How could a man with many resources be wandering the desert, injured and almost penniless, apparently fleeing something? Maria felt he was omitting important details, but she didn't press him. Her focus was on his recovery and the imminent threat from the bank. Time was running out, and with each passing day, Maria's anxiety grew. She felt the pressure of having a stranger in her house, a man who, despite his kindness, was an enigma. What if he was lying? They were rough-looking men, armed, and Maria felt a chill run down her spine. John, who was sitting on the porch, tensed. "They're looking for me," he whispered, his face pale. "The same ones who attacked me. What if he was a wanted criminal, bringing danger to her family?" These doubts haunted her, especially during sleepless nights. The dangerous situation was real. A cowboy. He came this way. Did you see him? His voice was harsh, and his gaze intimidating. The sheriff, though understanding, had his duties, and with each visit, the impending threat of the auction weighed more heavily on Maria's shoulders. Uncertainty hung in the air. Would John be a savior or just another burden? Maria struggled to believe, but the reality of poverty was a constant reminder of the fragility of her hopes. She took Anna and Joe, leading them inside the cabin, while John struggled to get up, looking for a place to hide. Anna, with her keen perception, seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. Joe, more attached, whimpered, not wanting his new friend to leave. Maria, for her part, was at a crossroads. Trusting John and his promise was a leap of faith that could result in a miracle or an even greater disappointment. John's departure was not just a guest leaving, but the climax of the tension, the moment when hope and fear clashed, and the fate of that family in the desert hung by a thread. He knew that Maria and her children had risked everything for him. Gratitude was a powerful feeling, mixed with guilt for having, even unintentionally, brought danger to that family. He watched Maria with admiration, her strength and resilience in the face of adversity. He also noticed the joy his presence brought to the children, Joe's laughter as he tried to teach the boy to throw a stone accurately, and the sparkle in Anna's eyes when he told her about oceans and big cities. The men stopped in front of the cabin, their eyes scanning the area. Food was rationed, and Maria struggled to hide her worries from her children. John knew he couldn't postpone his departure any longer. He needed to resolve his problems to fulfill his promise. The revelation that the men were the same ones who attacked him added urgency to the situation. He was determined to confront his enemies and reclaim what was rightfully his. The pain in his leg was a constant reminder of his vulnerability, but the promise to Maria was a greater force. The night the men appeared was a moment of pure terror. Maria felt her heart pound, cold sweat trickling down her spine. She knew that a wrong answer could mean death for John and, perhaps, danger for her and her children. Her mind worked quickly, her voice firm, though fear consumed her from within. Maria's courage in the face of danger was a crucial point. John, hidden, watched the scene, and an even deeper respect for Maria settled in his heart. One of them, a tall man with a scar on his face, dismounted and approached. The sheriff had made another visit, another reminder of the deadline, and the pressure was almost unbearable. Distrust was a shadow, mingling with the faint flame of hope. John, sensing Maria's hesitation, tried to explain, but vaguely. He mentioned botched business dealings, a dangerous journey to resolve urgent financial matters, and an unexpected attack that left him on the brink of death. "I was carrying a large sum of money with me, Maria," he revealed, his voice low. He told him stories about his travels, about distant lands and bustling cities, and the children saw him as a hero. John emerged from hiding, his eyes full of gratitude. "You saved me, Maria." Again. That incident, though terrifying, sealed Maria's trust in John. He was a man in trouble, yes, but he seemed to be a victim, not a villain. And the promise that he could change their lives seemed increasingly plausible, even if danger still lurked. The tension was palpable, but hope, now more concrete, began to blossom in the desert. She felt John's gaze on her, hidden in a dark corner of the cabin, his life in her hands. Maria's resources were limited, and the little they had was divided to feed everyone. "If you do see him, you'd better let us know," he growled before they rode off. There were days when food was so scarce that Maria's stomach growled with hunger, but she insisted that John and the children eat. John noticed her struggle and sacrifice, and his eyes showed a silent but deep gratitude. They didn't understand the gravity of the family's financial situation, but John's presence brought a welcome joy and distraction to the monotonous life on the farm. He taught Joe how to tie knots and identify constellations, and for Anna, he brought an old, dusty book, a treasure the girl devoured eagerly. But I was ambushed. They took everything and left me for dead. John's story was convincing, but still incomplete. Anna and Joe, for their part, were fascinated by John. As John recovered, the tension in the cabin grew. His leg injury was serious, and recovery was slow. Maria's concern was not limited to money. One evening, while John was still recovering, a group of unknown riders appeared on the horizon. Maria's heart pounded. "Madam, we saw an injured man around here." Maria, her voice trembling but maintaining composure, replied, "No, sir. I haven't seen anyone around here. We live alone." The man looked at her suspiciously, his eyes fixed on the cabin. "Are you sure? No one else has been here?" "Absolutely," Maria replied, trying to sound firm. After a moment of tension that seemed an eternity, the man grunted and, with a gesture to his companions, mounted his horse. Maria collapsed in a sigh of relief. John's presence in Maria's cabin, despite his promise of wealth, brought with it an additional layer of concern. John, in turn, felt the weight of responsibility. The tension within the cabin was a reflection of the external tension. The relief after the men left was immense, but the threat still lingered. The atmosphere in the cabin became heavier with John's impending departure. The children, though sad, understood the necessity. The visit from John's pursuers intensified the atmosphere of suspense in the cabin. John knew he couldn't stay there forever, and Maria felt that time was running out rapidly, not just for the cowboy, but for her own family. John's leg was not fully healed yet, but he could move around with less difficulty, leaning on a makeshift crutch. Each day, he became more determined to fulfill his promise. "Maria, I need to go," he said one morning, his voice firm. "I need to go to town and sort this out." He had become an unexpected part of their lives, a source of hope amidst despair. "And when I come back, your lives will be different, very different." But she also knew he was right. Inaction would lead them nowhere. The farm's auction was scheduled for a week from that day. "The men who attacked me, they took something that's rightfully mine, and without it, I can't help you." Maria felt a lump in her throat. The thought of him leaving was terrifying. She replayed all of John's promises in her mind, questioning if she had been naive to believe him. Dawn brought not only the sun, but also the certainty that this would be their last day in their home. He limped slightly, but the energy emanating from him was contagious. John had managed to recover his assets, proving the fraud of the men who attacked and robbed him. He had not only recovered his fortune, but also a large portion of the interest and compensation for everything he had lost. "Maria," he said, his voice choked, "I made it. We made it." Every ray of sunshine that pierced through the cracks in the cabin seemed a reminder of the dwindling time. She knelt, tears streaming down her face, praying for a miracle, for an intervention that could save her family from the abyss. She tidied the cabin one last time, as if bidding farewell to every corner, every memory. The distant sound of horse hooves, however, made her raise her head, a last glimmer of hope. And then there he was. John, riding his horse, looked like a specter emerging from the desert heat. His exhausted appearance did not diminish the sparkle in his eyes. The children slept, oblivious to their mother's internal battle, and Maria watched them, feeling the crushing weight of responsibility. She had already resigned herself to the loss of the farm, preparing for the next day with a broken heart. She tried to busy herself with daily chores, but her mind was on John, in town, on what he might be facing. Every dust cloud on the horizon made her run outside, only to be confronted with the vast emptiness of the desert. Loneliness and uncertainty were overwhelming. The children, seeing him, ran into his arms, joy exploding in laughter and hugs. Maria, paralyzed, could barely believe it. The lawyer and the bank agent confirmed John's story, the recovery of his fortune, the proof of fraud. The relief was so overwhelming that Maria felt her legs give way. The climax was not an epic battle, but the victory of justice and kindness, the triumph of faith over despair. John's promise had been fulfilled, and the fate of that family was, finally, saved. The future in the desert, once so uncertain, now opened up to a new and promising dawn. "But you're not completely healed yet, John," she argued, concern evident in her voice. "What if they catch you?" John's leg was not yet fully healed, and the journey to town was dangerous, especially with the men who were pursuing him at large. But there was a determination in his eyes, a silent promise that he would do everything to keep his word. The children, in their innocence, cried at the departure of their hero, but John hugged them, reaffirming his commitment to return. Maria, without much hope, went to the porch. But as the figure approached, her heart skipped a beat. There was the injured cowboy she had rescued, now a businessman, with his lawyer by his side, ready to save her farm. The relief was so great that her legs gave way. The children ran to hug John, who lifted them into his arms, a genuine smile finally on his face. The climax was not a violent confrontation, but the resolution of a mystery, the confirmation of a promise, and the arrival of a miracle at the most critical moment. It was John. He was riding his horse, and behind him came two more men, one of them carrying a large leather briefcase. Every knock on the door made her jump. Every dust cloud on the horizon made her run outside. With each passing day, the deadline drew closer, and Maria's hope dwindled. The sheriff made his final visit, a final warning that the auction would be held the next day. Despair tightened Maria's chest, and she felt tears stream down her face as she hugged her children. "I'll take every precaution," he replied, his eyes determined. "Trust me, Maria. I won't let you and your children down." Aina and Joha, who overheard the conversation, were sad. Joha clung to John's leg. "Don't go, John. Stay with us." John knelt, ignoring the pain, and embraced the children. "I promise I'll be back." That afternoon, John prepared to leave. Maria packed what little food they had left for him and prepared fresh bandages for his leg. John's horse, though still a bit thin, seemed stronger. The farewell was silent and charged with emotion. Maria watched him mount, her heart torn between hope and fear. John waved one last time before becoming just a distant dot on the horizon, disappearing into the vast immensity of the desert. The days that followed were the longest of Maria's life. "Will we be okay, Mommy?" Aina asked, her big eyes filled with fear. Maria forced a smile, trying to be strong for them. Yes, my love, we always will be. The night before the auction was the darkest. Maria couldn't close her eyes. Early in the morning, as the sun began to warm the desert, a distant sound of horse hooves echoed in the air. John dismounted from his horse, his face exhausted, but his eyes shone with unwavering determination. The men accompanying him were his lawyer and a bank agent. Maria couldn't believe what she was seeing. John's departure was a whirlwind of emotions. Maria felt a mix of apprehension and a faint hope. The days that followed were a slow agony for Maria. The night before the auction was the longest and most agonizing of all. Maria's despair reached its peak. The morning of the auction arrived with the relentless sun, and Maria rose with a knot in her stomach. The arrival of John and his companions was a moment of pure ecstasy. With the arrival of John and his companions, Maria's small cabin was filled with a different energy. John's lawyer, a serious and efficient man, quickly took care of the paperwork. Maria's debts were paid off, not only the principal amount but also the interest and all outstanding balances that suffocated her. The work continued, but now it was work with hope, with the certainty that their efforts would bear fruit. The well was dug and finally produced water in abundance. The parched lands began to show signs of life, and harvests, once scarce, flourished. Maria, once a poor and desperate widow, became a respected woman, her farm an example of prosperity. John, the rich cowboy, found true wealth not in his fortune, but in the humanity of a humble family who saved him. Maria, the poor widow, found her salvation not through money, but through an act of love and compassion. Life in the merciless desert showed that the greatest wealth is not in material possessions. He became a paternal figure for Anna and Joel, a mentor and a friend. He shared his experiences, his knowledge of the world, and sparked in them a curiosity and love for learning. Anna, with her sharp intellect, dedicated herself to her studies, dreaming of one day becoming a teacher. Joe, with his energy, learned from John about horses and farm work, developing a passion for life in the countryside. But in human connections and the ability to give and receive without expecting anything in return. The prosperity of Maria's farm attracted other settlers, and the region, once desolate, began to flourish. She used her new wealth wisely, investing in her children's education and helping other struggling settlers. The humility of her past kept her grounded, and gratitude to John was a constant in her life. Their relationship, though not romantic, was one of deep respect and friendship, a bond forged in adversity and strengthened by compassion. John, with his investments and vision, contributed to the development of small villages, the construction of schools, and the establishment of safe trade routes. He became a respected leader, an example of success and generosity. And so, a story of despair transformed into a testament of hope, proving that sometimes miracles come wrapped in dust and with an invaluable price, that of gratitude and love. A story about the power of the unexpected, about how a selfless act of kindness can generate a chain of events that change destinies. Life in the merciless desert, once so arid and unforgiving, revealed its ability to blossom, to surprise, to offer miracles disguised as strangers on the brink of death. Maria's cabin, once a symbol of destitution, now represented hope, the resilience of the human spirit, and the unwavering belief in the transformative power of compassion. She never forgot the difficult days, and always remembered her debt of gratitude to John, not for his wealth, but for his honesty and integrity. The atmosphere of despair that hung over Maria's farm dissipated like the morning mist. John's lawyer, with his formal and efficient demeanor, seemed like a guardian angel amidst the desert dust. Documents were signed, debts were paid, and Maria's financial freedom was a tangible reality. She felt a lump in her throat, a mix of relief, joy, and gratitude so profound that words seemed insufficient. The cabin, once a symbol of destitution, became a welcoming home, where laughter and joy replaced the silence of worry. He not only saved it from ruin but also helped it prosper. With the invested money, the new well was drilled and water gushed abundantly, a symbol of a new era. Quality seeds transformed the parched fields into fertile lands, and the small herd of cattle brought the promise of abundance. The cabin, once modest, was renovated and expanded, becoming a comfortable and welcoming home where the children's laughter echoed freely. Maria's farm, which was on the verge of auction, was saved. John, true to his word, not only paid the debts but also allocated a substantial amount for Maria to invest in her land, in quality seeds, a new well, and even a small herd. The news spread like wildfire in the desert. The sheriff, who had come for the auction, was astonished to see the turn of events. He greeted John with respect, understanding that this enigmatic cowboy was not a criminal, but a man of possessions and principles. John, in turn, briefly explained his story, but kept the details of his darker past secret, protecting Maria from any association with his former troubles. With the farm secure and money to prosper, Maria's and her children's lives changed radically. John arranged for a teacher to come to the farm, and the girl became a brilliant student, her talents revealing themselves daily. Joe, with his energy, helped on the farm, learning from John about horses and life in the countryside, growing strong and confident. John, though he could have left, chose to stay. He settled in the region, buying nearby land and investing in local businesses, becoming a respected figure in the community. His gratitude to Maria was evident in every gesture. He never forgot the act of kindness of that widow and her children, who rescued him from the brink of death without knowing his wealth. He became a friend and protector, a link of support that Maria never imagined having. Aina and Joe flourished with the new opportunities. Aina, with her love for books, gained access to an education that was once a distant dream. The story of Maria and John became a legend in the region, a tale about the power of compassion and how a single act of kindness can transform lives. The story ends with a reflection on the irony of fate. The impact of John's arrival was immediate and transformative. John, now recovered and with a lighter demeanor, revealed his plan for Maria's farm. John's presence in Maria's and her children's lives was not limited to financial aid. The community around the farm, once distant and scattered, began to transform. Maria, in turn, never forgot where she came from. The story of the widow and the rich cowboy became a whispered legend on the trails of the West.